The world used to be so loud. Now, in the small town of Ballynock, the silence sings its own quiet song. It hums along the sea wall, where the waves whisper secrets to the stones. It drifts through the empty lanes, where colourful doors stand like patient sentinels. The great quiet, as the old-timers call it, left its mark on everything. It took so much, leaving behind a stillness that felt both heavy and strangely peaceful. The air itself seems to hold its breath, waiting for a signal to begin again, to let the laughter and the music return to the cobblestones. The town is a watercolour painting, its edges softened by mist and memory. Life moves at the pace of the tides, slow, deliberate, and certain. People nod to each other from a distance, their eyes saying more than words ever could. There's a shared understanding in their gazes, a quiet acknowledgement of the chairs that will forever remain empty at the dinner table. The pandemic washed over them like a rogue wave, and now they are the ones left on the shore, learning to breathe again. Each sunrise feels like a small victory, a gentle promise that the world hasn't forgotten them. The quiet is a blanket, sometimes comforting, sometimes suffocating, but always there. The sea is the town's constant companion. It was there before, during, and after. Its rhythmic crashing against the cliffs is the heartbeat of Ballynock. It breathes in and out, a steady presence in a world that feels so unsteady. Children, once kept indoors, now run along the sandy stretch of beach, their shouts swallowed by the vastness of the ocean. They are building sandcastles, fragile kingdoms that will be washed away by the evening tide. It's a lesson the adults are learning too, that everything is temporary, beautiful, and worth building anyway. The sea doesn't offer answers, but it offers a place to ask the questions. In this stillness, small things have become magnificent. The sudden flash of a kingfisher by the river, the warmth of a fresh scone from the bakery, the only shop that never closed its doors, the way the light catches the sea glass scattered on the shore, turning broken things into jewels. People have started to notice these moments, to hold on to them like precious treasures. They are the anchors in the quiet, the proof that beauty endures even after the storm. The town is healing, one small, beautiful moment at a time, finding its voice not in loudness, but in the gentle poetry of survival. Liam's world shrank to the size of his small bookshop. He inherited the last page from his grandfather, a man who believed stories could mend any wound. But Liam lost him to the quiet, and now the shop feels more like a mausoleum than a haven. The scent of old paper and ink, once a comfort, now reminds him of all the stories his grandfather will never get to tell. He moves through the aisles like a ghost, straightening books he knows no one will buy. His grief is a silent, stubborn thing, a shadow that follows him even on the sunniest of days, clinging to his coat like the damp sea air. Then there is Elara, an artist from the city who sought refuge in Ballynock's calm. She came to escape the sirens and the sorrow, but she brought her own ghosts with her. Her sister, her best friend, was a melody silenced too soon. Elara now paints the sea, trying to capture its wildness, its sadness, its strength. Her canvases are filled with stormy greys and deep blues, the colours of her heart. She lives in a small cottage overlooking the bay, her only companion a scruffy dog named Skipper. Her pain is a loud, chaotic storm inside her, a stark contrast to the town's gentle quiet. Liam's days are ordered and predictable. He opens the shop at 9, closes at 5, and spends his evenings reading alone. He avoids the pub, the market, the places where memories ambush him. He finds solace in the crisp, unchanging words on a page, a world he can control when his own has spun so wildly out of orbit. He believes in endings, in stories that are neatly tied up. He has forgotten how to live in the messy middle, where chapters are unwritten and characters are unpredictable. His heart is a locked room, and he has misplaced the key somewhere in the dusty stacks of his shop. Ilara's life, however, is one of beautiful chaos. Her cottage is a landscape of paint tubes, half-finished canvases, and sketches taped to the walls. She walks the cliffs in all weather, letting the wind whip through her hair, feeling the sting of the salt spray on her cheeks. She is searching for a way to paint her sister's smile into a sunset, to hear her laugh in the cry of a seagull. She doesn't want to forget. She wants to learn how to remember without shattering into a million pieces. Her grief is not a quiet thing to be hidden away. It is a living, breathing part of her that she pours onto her canvas. Their first meeting was not a gentle ripple, it was a clumsy crash. Ilara, lost in thought and wrestling with a large, freshly painted canvas, stumbled right into the doorway of the last page. The canvas, still wet, left a long, shocking streak of cerulean blue across the shop's ancient wooden door. Liam rushed out, his face a thundercloud. He saw not a grieving artist, but a careless stranger defiling the one place he held sacred. The silence of his carefully curated world was broken, and he reacted with a sharpness that surprised even himself, his words clipped and cold. Ilara, mortified and already frayed, met his anger with her own frustrated spark. To her it was just paint, a splash of life on a door that looked as sad as everything else in this town. She didn't see a memorial. She saw a man clinging to something that was already gone. Their argument was a tangle of misunderstandings, a clash of two different kinds of pain. He spoke of preservation and respect. She spoke of expression and moving on. They were like two ships signaling in the fog, their lights barely piercing the dense mist of their individual sorrows, each unable to see the other clearly. Their paths continued to cross, as they always do in a town as small as Ballynock. He saw her on the cliffs, a solitary figure against the dramatic sky, and felt a pang of something he couldn't name. She saw him through the window of his shop, surrounded by books, a lonely king in a silent kingdom. Each encounter was brief and laced with a lingering tension from their first meeting. A curt nod at the bakery, a quick averted gaze at the post office. They were orbiting each other, two celestial bodies pulled by a strange, unseen gravity, their orbits defined by the space they kept between them. The conflict, however, began to chisel away at the walls they had built. One afternoon, seeking shelter from a sudden downpour, Ilara ducked into the bookshop. The air was thick with a tense silence. Liam was reshelving a book, his back to her. Without turning, he simply said, "The poetry section is to your left." It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't a dismissal either. It was an opening, a tiny crack in the door. She didn't browse the poetry. Instead, she stood there, dripping rainwater onto the floorboards, and watched him work, seeing for the first time the deep sadness in his shoulders. The thaw began with a book. A few days after the rain, Ilara returned to the shop. She didn't apologize for the door again. Instead, she handed Liam a small, leather-bound copy of a book of sea poems. "I thought you might like this," she said, her voice soft. "My sister loved it." It was a simple gesture, but it was an offering of her story, a piece of her pain. Liam took it, his fingers brushing against hers. He saw the vulnerability in her eyes and understood. This wasn't about paint on a door, it was about the marks that loss leaves on a heart. He read the book that night, the words of the poems mirroring the rhythm of the waves outside his window. The next day he left a small, faded book about local wildflowers on the doorstep of her cottage, with a note that simply said, "For your walks." He didn't knock, he just left it there, a quiet response in their newfound language. It was a conversation held in objects, in small acts of kindness that spoke louder than any words of apology could. They were learning to read each other's grief, to understand the silent sorrows that had shaped them. One evening, Ilara found Liam sitting on the sea wall, watching the tide roll in. She sat beside him, leaving a comfortable space between them. For a long time they said nothing, just listening to the sea. Then he turned to her and spoke of his grandfather, of the stories and the laughter that once filled the shop. She, in turn, spoke of her sister, of her vibrant, fearless spirit. They shared their memories like secrets, their words carried away by the sea breeze. In that shared twilight, forgiveness bloomed not as a grand declaration, but as a quiet, mutual understanding. Their love story wasn't a sudden flame. It was the slow returning tide. It was in the coffee he'd leave for her on her porch. It was in the small painting of a wildflower she left for him in the shop. They found hope not in forgetting their pain, but in sharing it. Ballynock was still quiet, but it was no longer a sad silence. It was a peaceful quiet, filled with the promise of new beginnings. The town and the two souls within it were healing together, their love a testament to the enduring beauty that can grow in the most broken of places.